Welcome to the next installment of my video lecture series for international economics. And in this particular video lecture, I'm going to be taking a look at equilibrium in a monopolistically competitive marketplace. And in particular, I'm going to take a look at the two different curves, the CC curve and the PP curve from your textbook, and just give you a little more of an explanation as to why they're shaped the way they are, etc., and how they're used together, and how in particular the CC curve can shift when the market changes. Realize that there's a positive relationship between cost and the number of firms. It's why this CC curve is upward sloping. Remember that the market size is fixed. There's a certain amount of sales that occur in this particular market. So when we increase the number of firms, their market share decreases. Thus, the amount of output per firm decreases. So as we have a decrease in output, we are going to see an increase in average cost. So make sure you realize the rationale for that. That as the number of firms increases, the firms that are in the marketplace are going to have a smaller and smaller market share, which means their output is shrinking. And since their output is shrinking, their average costs are increasing. I mean, the one way you could take a look at this, let's assume that we have a market where sales are 100,000 in a month or a week or a year, whatever time frame we have to pick. If we only have one firm in that marketplace, they have the entire market, their output's going to be 100,000. With two firms, their outputs are going to be 50,000 each. With four firms, 25,000 each. 5 firms, 20,000 each, and 10 firms, 10,000 each. So you can see that when you take that market and split it up by more and more firms, the individual outputs of firms is decreasing, getting smaller, so the average costs are going to be increasing. So make sure you remember that the CC curve just represents the relationship between cost and the number of firms, and that is a positive relationship. The other curve in this is the PP curve, and this is a downward sloping curve. And realize this, that what it's telling us is that as the number of firms increases, price is going to decrease. So think of it this way: as the number of firms increases, we increase the level of competition in the marketplace, and therefore the price should fall. So think of it in the extreme. If there was only one firm in this marketplace, they would charge the monopoly price. They would be a monopolist. So the monopoly price, we would have the highest price a profit maximizer would charge. Soon as firms start moving into this marketplace, that market is going to start to operate more and more like a competitive marketplace. So as the number of firms increases from 1 to greater than 1, we move from the monopoly price to a perfectly competitive price. So as the number of firms increases, the price that is being charged in the marketplace decreases. So make sure you remember that the PP line is just the relationship between price and the number of firms, and that there's a negative relationship between price and the number of firms due to the fact that as we increase the number of firms, the level of competition increases. Now we can use these together to give us an equilibrium where the CC curve and the PP curve intersect one another. Price and average cost are equivalent to one another, and that gives us the equilibrium number of firms. So where the PP curve and the CC curve intersect one another, that gives us an equilibrium. So let's take a look at this and let's see what happens if we don't have that equilibrium number of firms and why we would move towards that equilibrium number of firms. I'm just going to make those equilibrium numbers a little less easier to see, so it's so I can illustrate these other points a little bit easier, so you can still see those. Let's assume that the number of firms is less than N1. Let's assume it is right here. And let me make that a dotted line. And let me copy this. I'm going to cheat, copy that and move it over and change the subscript. So we have N1 Actually, let me retype that. This program gets a little wonky sometimes when you copy and paste things for some reason. Come on. Now I don't want you sticking there. There you go. And let me change the opacity on that so it can be seen. So that is N1. At a level of N1, what are we going to end up seeing? If we follow N1 upward, the first thing that we hit is CC, which gives us our average cost. So if I go from that point over, and let me duplicate that and move it over and change it to a C1. So we see we have an average cost at that particular level with that number of firms. And if we keep going upward, we'll hit the PP curve, which gives us the relationship between price and the number of firms, and that will tell us what the price is. Again, let me duplicate that and move that up there. So that is the price. So what we can see here is that when we have N1 firms, what do we end up noticing? That price is greater than average cost. These firms are going to be profitable. Their price is going to be greater than their average cost, which means they're going to be making an economic profit. And as we know, in a marketplace where there's freedom of entry, those profits are going to act as an incentive for entry, and we are going to see the number of firms increasing as firms respond to the economic profits that are being made by the existing firms in that marketplace. And that entry will occur and keep occurring until the difference between P1, between the price and average cost, disappears completely, and we get to the point where price is equal to average cost. And we can do the same thing for if the number of firms is greater. So let me draw in an N that is greater here. And let me call it N3. Again, I'm cheating and duplicating these items. And let's hope it does it for me. Oh, that time it worked without messing up for me. So there we have N3. So that's the number of firms 3, which is greater than the equilibrium amount of firms. So we can follow that number upward until we hit PP, which will tell us the price. So I can put that price line, that dotted line, right there. For some reason it changed to blue, which I did not want it to do. So this is going to be P3. And if we follow up from N3 up to CC, which gives us average cost, we can plot out our average cost. And again, I'm going to cheat and duplicate and move it up there. So that's going to be average cost 3. So when we're at N3, what do we see? We follow that up from N3 up to PP. That tells us what the price is going to be. If we continue up N3 until we hit CC, that tells us what average cost is going to be. So we can see here that when the number of firms is equal to N3, we have a situation in this particular market, in this industry, where average cost is greater than the price. These firms are going to be making economic losses, and since we have freedom of entry and exit in a monopolistically competitive marketplace, firms that are losing money will start to exit, and the number of firms will shrink until we get to the equilibrium point of N2, and at N2, that is where price and average cost in this industry are equal to one another. Therefore, there's no incentive for entry and there is no incentive for exit. If we continue on here, we want to also have an idea of what will occur if we have an increase in the market. That is, remember in my previous example, I said that there's 100,000 sales in this particular marketplace. Let's say that there's an increase and sales go from 100,000 in this particular market to 200,000, or a number that's an increase. What does that impact? Make sure you realize that it impacts the CC curve. So let me actually put in and call this CC1 and make it a subscript, so you know that we're going to have a second CC curve. So we are starting here at our initial equilibrium point where CC1 intersects PP, and that gives us the price and average cost, which are equal to one another. And let me change this for you, make that a 1 and make both of these a 1, as these are both going to be our starting points. So that is going to be our initial equilibrium. An increase in the market. What's going to happen when we increase the market? We're going to be increasing the market share of the individual firms in that particular market. So they are going to have an increase in sales due to the increase in the market, and that is going to cause them to have lower average cost than that is represented by CC1. So what we can do is, again, cheat and draw in a CC curve that is shifted downward. So this downward shifting of the CC curve is due to the fact that we have an increase in the market. Since there's an increase in the market, the amount of sales for each firm in the marketplace is going to increase, their output is going to increase, and we are going to see a decrease in average cost for those firms. So what is going to be the new equilibrium? So number one, make sure that you understand why the CC1 curve shifted downward. The increase in the size of the market increases the number of sales for each of the individual firms. So as their output increases, average total cost decreases. So what's going to be the new equilibrium point? The new equilibrium point is going to be where CC2 intersects PP. So if we go from that point over, that's going to be the new equilibrium. Let me duplicate that, move it down, change the subscripts. And what is going to be the new equilibrium number of firms? We just go down from where CC2 intersects PP, and now that is going to be number of firms 2. And think of this, what happens initially? We are at this initial equilibrium point here. And this is our original CC curve, and price and average costs are equal to one another. That is why you're at equilibrium. Now the market increases and the CC curve shifts downward to CC2. If we stay at the original number of firms, what do we end up seeing? We end up seeing that price is going to be greater than average cost, so that's going to act as the incentive to entry, and that is why we move from an equilibrium point from N1 to N2, and at that point, price and the new average cost are equal to one another, and there's no incentive for entry or exit in this marketplace.